Okay, that was the CBC's chief correspondent, Adrienne Arsenault, with an exclusive television interview today with Prime Minister Mark Carney, covering a lot of ground there, starting with an exploration of the Sovereign Wealth Fund announcement from earlier today, discussing expectations, whether Canadians can expect help on issues such as affordability in the spring now, economic update coming tomorrow, talking about what role Canada might be able to play and the limits of what role Canada might be able to play in helping sustain a peace should there be a resolution to the conflict in the Middle East with Iran. But a lot of conversation there about the state of the trade talks with the United States. Mark Carney saying that they don't want to chase a small deal that puts Canada in a weaker position when it comes to dealing with a larger deal and essentially trade off too much for sectoral tariff reliefs in return for putting yourself in a position that weakens your hands at the broader CUSMA negotiations, which are getting underway in earnest this year. Acknowledging that the United States needs to buy in on whatever the deal is, or they simply, the lesson has been, they simply will not honor it, saying that things could resolve within 10 days if they could get back to the table and focus on it. But also talking a little bit about the relationship with the president, saying you need to be straight with him, don't want to insult and antagonize anyone, but also don't want to say anything that he doesn't believe in, and saying while the president may like to be flattered, he can see through obsequiousness, to use the Prime Minister's word, and ending the interview on a point, sort of a punctuation mark on the criticism that Canada has received that other countries have been able to get deals of some form with the United States, saying, find me one of those countries that is happy with the deal that they got. Certainly in private, he suggests to Adrienne there at the end, they are not happy. So a lot there to go over, a lot to talk about, what we just heard in that interview with the Prime Minister. And that's why I have the power panel here right out of it. Vandana Cotter is here. She was an advisor to former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Brad Levine is a former national campaign director for the NDP. Emily Nicolas is a columnist for Le Devoir. And here with me in the studio is Kate Harrison, who is, of course, a conservative political analyst. It's good to see you all. Look, we just had 28 minutes, Kate, of a Liberal Prime Minister talking to the CBC, so I'm going to go to the opposition conservative point of view here now. Well, what did you make of what you heard from Mark Carney there? Let's start with the end, where he's talking about Canada, U.S., and where things are with the president. What did you make of that?
Yeah, I think it is a decent overview of where we currently sit. The Prime Minister has a very professorial way of speaking. He really likes to add context. I noticed a few times in that interview, he was saying, well, let me take a step back and let me, provide a little bit more rationale, which is, a delicate way of not answering a direct question. I mean, I think if this could really be sorted out in a matter of days with both parties coming to the table, the Prime Minister is opening himself up to some questions about, okay, well then what has taken so long and why has there been this drag? There was all this fervor back in the spring and into the summer about being able to secure a deal. I believe it was for July 1st, and then there was a second deadline. And so, if it can really be something that is sorted out quickly, then what is the current actual status of those negotiations? So, I think that he's playing to his audience in terms of talking about the unpredictability of the president, and that is, he's fair to do that. But as we approach July 1, and if things are really just a matter of bandwidth, as to use his term, on both sides, surely our government should be willing to find that bandwidth. Yeah.
So Vandana, on that, to give sort of a precision on some of the quotes here, you say we could sit down this afternoon and hammer the whole thing out over the course of the next 10 days. If the U.S. side, which has other things to do, I acknowledge, if they had the bandwidth and the inclination to go through it, we could hammer it all out. But then he sort of backstops that with the point he made that unless the deal is aligned and bought into by the U.S., it's not clear that they will respect it, right? So it's threading both of those needles at the same time, it seems, is the challenge here.
Yeah, absolutely. It just sounds like, frankly, that the U.S. doesn't want to negotiate right now, or, in the way I read it, is negotiate on their terms. I think there's some issues that the U.S. has that Canada won't fold on, which is like supply management, for example. So I think the point is, if we went to them and said, we're ready to negotiate on your terms, they're ready to come to the table, they say, sure. I think what the Prime Minister is trying to say is that unless we're negotiating in the way they want to negotiate, it's not going to happen. But if they're willing to be equal partners here and come to compromise on things that we care about, then yeah, we can come to the table and hammer it out.
Brad, how do you view the assessment there, the summary, the diagnosis, as Kate called it?
Yeah, it's interesting, and I'm getting the sense here that there's no sense of rush, that time is actually on Canada's side as opposed to on the U.S.'s side. we have a president who is very distracted. I found it interesting when the Prime Minister was saying, you know, when we have a meal after the press conference in the Oval Office, first thing was, what should I do in Iran? Clearly, the President of the United States is distracted. And while CUSMA seems to be a main focus of the government of Canada right now, it certainly is not the only focus of the government of the United States. So time is on our hands. We're looking at, obviously, the review dates. I think we've collectively recognized that we're going to pass through some of these dates. The July 1st deadline, if you will, is not going to pass. And I think they're lowering the expectation, saying that's not a death knell at all. And of course, the midterms, I think, has to be on a lot of Republicans' minds right now, because the polling is not advantageous to the Republicans. So a lot of distractions in the South, and so I think that what we're hearing from the Prime Minister today in the interview is more of just we're in no rush.
Yeah, I read his point about or his story about the first question being about Iran. I think that was like last May, like right after the election, the first trip to the Oval Office. And this is something that has been on Trump's mind since the 80s, seemingly. So that was an interesting little nugget of insight there into just how top it is at the president's mental checklist. Emily, what were your thoughts on what we heard there from the Prime Minister on the Canada-U.S. stuff in particular?
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned Iran. I think that's the thing that struck me the most in this interview is that because the Canada-U.S. relationship is so strained, you know, one of the words that came up the most is, you know, we're taking a pragmatic approach is one of his key lines, and it works well when it comes to explaining how do you negotiate with Trump and the CUSMA deal, and why is it that it's not necessarily a good way to have it now. So when there's a clear economic interest, it's a way of discussing things that work. But if you look at the other segments of the interview, when it was a question of Iran, when it was the question was posed to, you know, we're now speaking to these other countries in the Gulf, we're now speaking to Turkey, having broader relationship with people trying to solve basically the situation in Iran. That's when it's very striking when you compare to past Prime Minister or even Mark Carney from the Davos speech days, that, you know, all the vocabulary about, you know, Canadian values or even the rule of law, international law, all of that is not there, and you still have that pragmatic approach, but it's unclear pragmatic approach towards what. When Mark Carney says he's having conversation about Iran with the president, and that the president of the United States is very curious about, you know, his take on Iran. He said that, but we don't know what his take on Iran actually is. And I think a lot of people within the Liberal caucus want to know more about that. And that's still the issue. And so I guess we have a Prime Minister that when it comes to the economy, the pragmatic approach, we know what he wants because it's about Canadian prosperity. But when it comes to those other diplomacy files, he's entering all those chats in a pragmatic way, but pragmatic approach towards what goal, what principles, what values. It's very unclear when you re-listen to this entire interview.
Well, it's interesting on that point, Kate, that Emily raises, because the list of countries the Prime Minister referenced in that answer was Oman, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Qatar, and of course Turkey, where President Erdogan, while you know, a NATO member,
one of these things is not like the other.
It's not the UK we're talking about there, right?
Yes.
But he says that doesn't mean we endorse everything that happens in these countries. Of course not. We don't endorse everything that happens in our closest allies either. It's a more pragmatic approach to these situations because it means that we can work to help resolve things. How do you think Canadians view that sort of position?
Yeah, I think Emily raises a really important point when it comes to foreign policy. The Prime Minister is very quick to play the economics card and the importance of strengthening some of those economic relationships, and he's much more reluctant to share what the position is on Liberal foreign policy. You know, as we saw around the Gaza conflict, I think caucus falls on two sides of this issue, and so I take that it's a difficult thing for him to manage. I do want to get at something that the panel is talking about in terms of time and time on CUSMA, because yes, getting a good deal is important, not accepting the first deal that comes around.
Sure.
But it is also a gamble. We are assuming here that President Trump just simply becomes distracted by other things. You know, he becomes consumed entirely by Iran. And
Well, he has
consumed
been,
by,
to be fair.
Yeah.
Whether he stays that way, we don't know.
I think that it is still a risk to keep holding on to the deal that we have without advancing conversation on some key matters. And if you think about the federal government's own approach, they were very close to signing a deal back in the fall that would have dealt with a few sectoral issues in particular. So this is a recalibration. This is an adjustment. Some will call it a flip-flop from where the Canadian government previously was. And I think that, you know, if we're all calling Donald Trump an irrational actor, it is a gamble to assume the status quo in terms of his negotiating position with Canada not changing between now and July or sometime after July.
Yeah, so certainly impulsive, maybe a word, but you know, it is an unpredictable thing. I think it's safe to say, Vandana. But I thought there was another interesting point in that segment where the Prime Minister talks about how, yes, auto, steel, aluminum, they've been disrupted, key strategic industries that the U.S. has identified for disruption. But broadly, they've kept everything else in place, which sort of shows the value of CUSMA. And it's how do you calibrate this going forward and without, you know, throwing your core sectors, some of your core sectors, under the bus, right? This is the challenge at the moment.
Yeah, I think it's a challenge that and I think that's part of the long-term strategy is how do we make it valuable to Donald Trump and to the American people that relief on these tariffs is good for the American economy. I mean, he said himself one of the lessons is that, you know, the president himself have to buy into these things. So I think he feels that while it is a risk, I agree, it's a risk he's willing to bet on because the opposing ability to do so doesn't give a good deal to Canada. So I think he's feeling that more confident based on the conversations they have. Like they mentioned, maybe there's senior, you know, readouts that are happening that, you know, we aren't privy to, but something that gives him an inclination that waiting is better than not. And that if we can make the argument to the American people, and if Donald Trump is hearing from his own people himself that affordability is not better for us, you know, the midterms are coming up, there's political pressure on him, that perhaps the deal will bring some relief to some key players for Donald Trump, that's a better way to go, and that's better for Canada overall.
But, you know, Brad, Kate has a point here, right? That whether it's irrational, impulsive, unpredictable, however you want to describe it, sort of, you know, counting on things to proceed in a predictable, even the status quo as it is right now, counting on that to persist is a difficult choice.
Yeah, it is a difficult choice. And I want to pick up on the point about waiting for a better deal is better than rushing a bad deal. And I think late in the week, I think the Friday or Thursday panels was talking about the outrage that the Americans were sending our way about the liquor, out of the blue, the liquor, you know, not having American liquor on our shelves. I know that officials were in front of Congress last week when the issue came up. I think from one of the New Hampshire Congress people. I think that the tell was there that you can see the impatience, or when they have their outbursts, when the American officials have their outbursts about this is outrageous or this is an irritant. And I thought that the Prime Minister's tone afterwards, you want to talk about irritants, let's talk about 50% on trade, 50% on aluminum, 25 on autos. You know, it's a two-way street here. They like to negotiate much more in the public realm. They'll say things in the public realm that'll be part of their negotiating strategy, and in some cases the tell. What I thought that the Prime Minister was doing with Adrienne's interview was letting us in a little bit on some of the kind of the intimate interface that he has with the president, to let us know what he sees, what our officials are up against. So, you know, a lot of people say, we don't know what the strategy is. Well, clearly I don't think that we're going to negotiate this in the public realm, and that's probably wise. We don't do it in the trade union movement. Why would we do it when it comes to the economy? But the idea that the more we know about what he's like, that he needs to be a straight shooter. He doesn't like flattery, or he can see through disingenuous flattery. I think those are kind of interesting drops in that interview with Adrienne, because it provides some insight that the Canadians can help imagine a little bit about what our officials are up against when it comes to the Americans. Yeah,
look, the U.S. revealed last week, Emily, they're all in on the FA part. They don't like the find out part, but you know, that's kind of what we're into. Yeah. But just on sort of to marry these two threads with your point on you know, on the foreign policy being this less ideological, more pragmatic, and dealing with some countries that maybe there might have been judgments in the past. I mean, with this unpredictability and this disruption, do you just lose the luxury of principled foreign policy? I don't want to say they're unprincipled, but you know what I mean, like taking an ideological approach on who you can and can't deal with when the Americans have done what they have done.
It's not so much about who you can and cannot deal with. It's about whether or not we can afford to call out the Americans and other countries, but mostly the Americans. It was really interesting to hear, and I don't have the exact word, his answer to Adrienne's question on maybe we're gonna see if the countries involved maybe there's been some violation to international law. We're gonna find out, which is the exact opposite of calling out any infringement on international law or war law or crime of wars that we already know just by having eyeballs are clearly happening. And so this is the opposite approach to that. And so we need to just deal with the fact that this is we do have a prime minister that says a lot of things about we need to protect the rule of law, but isn't calling out the rule of law being attacked in real time. But I also wanted to maybe address what we've been seeing on his the way he displays his relationship to Donald Trump. I think part of it is when it comes to the any sort of trade deal, is that there is this huge, I guess, cliff we're all heading towards in the fall, which is the midterm election. Mm-hmm. Nobody has a sense of how those are going to take place, if they take place, and if Donald Trump loses. We do have some prior history in terms of how much of a bad loser he is. There are some really serious questions that need to be raised in terms of election results being accepted if they are held in a responsible and peaceful way. And so the volatility that it entails in the period leading up to that and the period after that, and in terms of any deal that has been agreed on, even if there is something that is agreed on July 1st, the sort of tantrums that can be thrown by the White House in the fall makes us all, I think, in Canada very just watching for that day in our calendar. And I think what Mark Carney is trying to do in an interview like this is not so much, part of it is answering the conservative criticism of why is it that there's no deal. Right. And part of it is just, as long as he's popular with the public, it's just saying, here is how I view my relationship. And it's not so much about the actual information that he's giving us than about him coming across as trustworthy and knowledgeable and in charge and somebody that we can trust in terms of handling with Donald Trump. And I think as long as Canadians have that view of him as somebody who's able to handle the relationship, it matters more to him politically than the details of what is it that he's actually doing.
Okay. Look, we're getting short on time just because, we have it's a long interview. But, Emily, on a positive note, we're under 1,000 days left in the Trump presidency. It's 998 now. So, we're down to triple digits. I want quick thoughts on tomorrow. The Prime Minister is suggesting, Kate, a smaller than the 75 in round number $1 billion deficit in the spring economic update and launching a sovereign wealth fund today, which the Conservatives criticize as a sovereign debt fund because they're going to borrow to endow it. Just what do you expect the takeaway to be tomorrow?
Just because it's a rosier picture on the deficit doesn't mean that it's a rosy picture. And I thought the Prime Minister was very careful in that interview not to say that there was something more coming for people's household debt. Canada still has worst household debt in the G7, second highest unemployment in the G7. A sovereign wealth fund is a long-term game. There is a lot to criticize about the way this one in particular is set up. Namely, we don't have a lot of wealth to be investing right now. We are investing based on borrowing. It is not at all what Norway has done.
It's more like Singapore. It's different than
Norway is not able to invest in its own domestic projects. Also, their fund is $2 trillion, and again, ours is actually being funded less than what the government funded the infrastructure bank. So I think if the big marquee announcement for tomorrow is the Sovereign Wealth Fund, which looks a lot like previous government funds, Canadians are going to be asking what is in this economics update for them.
Yes, I don't know if it'll be a rosy deficit picture, but it'll be a rosemary picture tomorrow, as Rosemary Barton and me are going to be hosting starting at 4 o'clock Eastern. Vandana, your quick thoughts on tomorrow?
I think today was all about the bigger picture. So I think the Sovereign Wealth Fund was more about how do we pay for some of these projects. It's a way to capitalize on the patriotism that Canadians are feeling right now to invest in Canada. It reminds me of a different time in my life when I sold government bonds at some point. People, senior citizens mainly, enjoyed them. They felt there was a less risk to them, and they felt they were helping the country. I think tomorrow you will see more of the how. You'll see more of affordability measures. I think actually how I read his interview is he alluded to things for offset, whether it's in communities. He mentioned some sports. I think you'll see things around careers, workers, maybe something for young people to who is going to build these things in the end, so people in the trades. So I think you actually will see a bit more affordability measures for people. Will it affect everybody? I'm not sure, or they'll pick segments of the population, but for that part, we'll have to see.
Yeah, the Sovereign Wealth Fund, Brad, I need to know why I would invest in a Crown Corporation as opposed to, say, an S&P 500 index. If you know what I mean? What's the value proposition? So I like the patriotism idea of it, but they canceled the Canada Savings Bond for a reason. Your quick thoughts,
I remember
Brad?
that. I remember the Canada Savings Bond. Yes, the answer is I don't know why people would put it. It would be like buying. You might as well just buy a bond, on the bond market. It'll play the same role. The challenge he's going to have to do is explaining, the purpose of it. Is it to help make Canada infrastructure more interesting or more attractive for global money, because there's going to be this fund that's going to help reduce the overall financial burden for folks from overseas? That's part of it. In Norway, they have surpluses. They have big surpluses. They own 2/3 of their oil and gas industry, and they take that and they invest around the world. We do not have a surplus. We do not own our oil and gas, and this sovereign wealth fund is to invest domestically. The interesting thing is, where will it fit in the ecosystem? Could it partner with, for example, the Indigenous Loan Guarantee Program to help start buying some of these things that right now don't have a proponent? I'm thinking pipeline.
Yeah, look, well, that's where my head went. But Norway's a unitary state. It gets all the oil revenue. It doesn't have provinces, so it's a different kind of thing there. Trust me, we looked at this in Newfoundland and Labrador.
Yes.
Emily, I have 30 seconds. I've gone over time. What's the number one thing you're watching for tomorrow?
The reason we're talking about the fund today is because the Prime Minister did not want to talk about it tomorrow as much, so that he made it a side announcement. So I think tomorrow is going to be about affordability in a way that he's been hinting at measures that will essentially make the fund yesterday's news. So I think he wanted us to talk about the fund today, so that we focus on measures that are going to mean something more to everyday Canadians tomorrow. Whether or not those are going to be satisfactory, it's going to be followed.
Yes, I think a big sovereign wealth fund might have squeezed out a bunch of things tomorrow if they surprise us with it. You're probably right on that. All right, I want to thank the Power Panel, Vandana Cotter, Brad Levine, Emily Nicola, and Kate Harris.